All right, good evening. So I'm calling the Policy Committee meeting to order. It is Tuesday, November 23rd at 6:03 p.m. Roberto Rodriguez, I'm the chair of the committee. Member of the committee that's present today is Aura Russell-Better, and then from the staff, Assistant Superintendent Aaron Townsend is joining us today. We have a light agenda. We're going to approve our minutes from our previous meeting, and then after that, we have one item on the agenda to discuss two policies, the JICH and JICH, the procedure to it, which is our drug and alcohol use policy. Those are the last two of the big batch of policies that we had set out to do for the year. So we're just going to finish up with wrapping them in. So anyways, Aura, for the minutes of October 26th, let's know, do you want to move to approve them?
Yep, so move.
Any questions, or did you have a chance to look through them?
Yeah, I peeked at it. Looks good.
All right, perfect. Same here. No problems with them. So without objection, we'll note them as approved unanimously by all of the members of the policy committee. Then next, Aaron, I'll hand it to you to give us an update on the JICH and JICH procedures policy.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, excited to kind of bring these forward. So at last meeting, we looked briefly at kind of the example from South Portland and discussed a little bit of just kind of conceptually what the committee's interest was in terms of kind of policy revisions. So what we've done is kind of update based on those. So we have both the policy and related procedure, did a little bit of fine tuning on the policy to just for clarity purpose, because there seemed some redundancies and things like that. So worked with our team from Drummond on the policy piece. So they helped with that, have reviewed that with, our high school admin and a couple social workers, and then also shared it with kind of one of our new partners through Opportunity Alliance, Jean Cousins now. So I've been engaged back and forth with her via email about these. And then the procedure is similarly based, broadly on, kind of the South Portland model. I also, as we looked at, kind of incorporated language that we had used previously with the tobacco and vaping policy, just, that part of the interest was in kind of aligning our process and procedures as it relates to those two, really kind of treating both as substance use issues and providing appropriate interventions. So the language is a little bit more reflective of what we had adopted with the tobacco and vaping policy, but all just generally in the spirit of, providing kind of, focusing on the interventions as opposed to the discipline and consequences that was, had more of a theme in our existing policy at the moment. So yeah, we can take it first by the policy. Let's kind of discuss the policy and then get into the procedure. There's definitely a couple places I still have, I'll just say now, pending legal review of the procedure. We had just spent time in yesterday's business meeting with the high school admin kind of talking about this. And I should say also that we reviewed and discussed both with the Living Contract Committee, which is the partnership with PEA. So again, broadly got support from that body and the high school admin. They really reflected like we've been working towards a practice that's reflective of this anyway. So it's supportive to kind of deepen that. And their questions were more about, adding more additional capacity and resources for the substance use treatment versus kind of the steps in the process and the procedure. So anyway, that's a little bit of the feedback that we've gotten from the engagement thus far. But let's talk kind of policy and then jump into the procedure. And there's definitely a couple of places I'm interested in discussion on the procedure for sure. So take notes.
Is there? I see the two documents. Is there one that has the
red line? I haven't done a red line. I certainly can as we move forward, just because it was such an overhaul. It would have been virtually, squashed since we are kind of starting from a place of kind of modeled after the South Portland policy. So, so I haven't, but I can certainly, as we move this forward, create one of those for full board.
We'll see. If it's a complete overhaul, then it might not even be worth it.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just taking my notes for a second if you guys want to revisit that. Right, I'm ready whenever you guys are ready, and we can take another moment. But
or do you have any questions?
Nope.
I guess in the big changes. So I guess do you want to frame how just the overall change from I guess we talked last time about the South Portland model policy, or the policy that we were using for the. So do you want to talk about what were just the biggest contrasting pieces?
yeah, I mean, I would say the policy, the most substantive changes are really in the procedure. The policy itself is, I think has a greater focus than the prior one on the intervention section in terms of providing that kind of support. There's some updated definitions, but that's in the prior policy, in the introductory language, I think is a little bit more in keeping with how we've been framing things. The last one had, language of this compliance is mandatory for all, and, just a little, harsher language, I guess I would say. So I think, the goal of this one is to kind of lift up the spirit of kind of intervention a bit more clearly, and provide just some updates. But I don't think the policy itself has, from either of them. Our prior one, the Southport one, it had some consistent elements around the notion of prevention and intervention and definitions.
And there's no difference in the prohibited substances list. They're pretty much the same ones, right?
Yes. Let me go back. I'm looking at the.
Looks like they're the same ones.
Yeah. The steroids. Steroids was not included in the prior policy. So this one went alcohol, scheduled drugs, controlled substances defined by the federal law, prescription drugs not in compliance with JLCD.
It was in a different point. It was in 0.5.
It's included in 0.5. Any substance.
The old policy.
Oh, or steroids. Yeah. Okay. So it was just that final piece. Yeah. In terms of steroids. Yeah. I see.
It must be because now it's part of the Maine Department of Health and Human Services list of banned substances.
Right. Yeah.
And back then, for the original policy, they were just steroids.
Right. Yeah. 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 But otherwise, similar list.
Yep. Okay. All right. So should we get then into the procedures?
Yeah, let's jump into the procedures. If you guys want to take a moment to review again here, I'll just summarize, put a brief note in. All right, I'm ready. Yeah, whenever you guys are.
I guess the just one just starting question on this first section. This is all if in the event that a student is found in violation while in school grounds, right?
Yeah, we let's see. Let's go back. It was JICH that kind of has that language. So under Section C, under the influence before, during, and after school hours at school and any school activity in any school building or school premises and any school-owned vehicle or other school-approved vehicles. And any school-approved activities or functions off school property, such as field trip or athletic event, or a broad catch-all anytime that it directly interferes with the operation, discipline, or welfare of the schools. So a pretty broad, the policy, which is where that is a pretty broad scope.
So I guess I'm wondering. Let's say, for example, it's a Friday night at a football game, and it's students who are not obviously playing the game, but in the stands or something. Where does then calling parents, that becomes a really a challenge, right? Like you're away from where your structures of communication are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we enforce these outside of like the normal day school time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like athletics or dances, right, as we talked about earlier, though obviously it's been a while since we've had to contend with that. That's why administrators are required to be present. There's intervention, if a student is visibly intoxicated, they'd be kind of, pulled to the side and we would get access. I mean, the Infinite Campus does have mobile apps, in terms of looking up student contact information and things like that. So, that's, often what folks are, it's not necessarily, people are supervising to ensure safety broadly, right? But, monitoring for any potential issues in that regard is definitely part of what the administrators, athletic directors, the supporting admins, are there to support with. And it's not necessarily the primary concern, but, certainly always on the radar.
I guess the thought is just, to make sure that the same process takes place in those events than they do inside the school versus like, obviously what we're trying to avoid, like calling the police when
Right.
It's happening, outside of a school building.
Yeah. And I think, I think that generally, for just intoxication, right, and use, right, I think that's part of why, we had that conversation about not just having it be standard, that, that we have law enforcement at the dance or whatever the case may be, right, to reduce the likelihood of that. But I think the general practice has been, to contact parents, get them in the care of their guardian, so that they can sober up, and then we deal from there.
Yeah. Aura, did you have questions? I'm sorry.
Are you done with that topic, Chair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a couple questions, Aaron, about, let's see. I just was trying to think and didn't know if this came up about age that a minor can access substance abuse treatment without parents signing off. Do you know that? Because I know for mental health, I'm pretty sure, and I won't say because I haven't worked with youth for a couple of years, but I thought that, there was a certain age at which that you could, so I just was curious about that because there could be a case, sounds like with this process of the meeting and, treatment is recommended. And I wondered, if there was instances without parental support for that. So I don't know if that's something we can ask people about that or.
Yeah, I could gather more information. I'm not sure if there is, if there is some age restriction, right, that requires additionally parental consent. So.
Well, no, I thought it was that might not be 18, like I was just thinking, what if a student wanted to access through the school or through some other resource, and didn't have I just thought that would be good for us to have that clear of, what the rights at what age, just in case this did.
In terms of self-referral.
Yeah. In case this moved forward with a student wanting to get services, and then just what are their rights to do so, and I think best practices to have a parent, obviously, mental health world like that, you want parental involvement and support, but there are cases, I think, where it may be that that's not the case, but it may be that the student is being encouraged by school to get treatment. So I just think that might be useful to just know, because I think it's the state law about substance abuse and mental health treatment. So that thought just came up, and thinking that could be a situation that might...
It does say, and I mean, this goes back to the policy, the leading piece in the intervention section, and speaks to students seeking help, kind of self-reporting, or being referred for help. So not necessarily treated as like a policy violation, but somebody they're being referred, or hi Claire, looking, just trying to get support, right? There had been kind of like what felt like a belabored procedure in our prior policy about referrals.
Okay.
It doesn't speak to any age issues around that. It does say, it says we'll notify parent or guardian if appropriate and with proper student consent. Mm-hmm. So some fairly conditional language there, but
can you point out where? I think I missed that part where it said.
Well, it's not in, because it wasn't in the South Portland procedure, right? So it's something we could, reinstate in this policy, I
think I do see.
Not in the policy, but the procedure. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, I do see where it says best practice interventions for substance use. So I do think, having a parent, it looks like a parent is to be part of this meeting, right? I don't know if it would even happen without a parent. That looks to me that a parent would need to be, right? Part of.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess maybe in that case, it's more following best practice than it is following what, the legal. But I guess I just thought, it's possible that there could be an instance where student wanted to pursue that when a parent did not. And I just wanted to know, would that be something that the school would be in a situation to have to make some call about that? But I guess most of the referrals are for outside. Is that right? I mean...
Yeah, and there's some, limited capacity from our social workers to provide this kind of support, but we do, try and partner with groups like Day One and others, for other more, kind of intensive substance use. So.
Okay. So I guess I don't feel...
The health clinic, there are referrals through
right in the clinic, yeah.
Yeah,
I guess I don't feel a need for that to be changed. I think now that I'm saying out loud, I'm thinking, well, the health clinic would have its own protocol of, parental, signing off or whatever. And so, and whatever other agencies too. So I don't think it's missing. It just kind of triggered for me wondering about how that would play out if there was the kind of parent versus student feeling about getting treatment. But I do think the best practice language kind of covers that. So but thank you for explaining that a little bit. I think I had another question, but I'm just going to think for a second. Where was I?
I'm really interested both in, as I came back to this, so if I can pose a few questions, possibly, unless you have a burning one, Roberto, of things. There were a couple of pieces I wanted to just flag for discussion with the group. So I guess one is just in the, primarily the use and possession. Again, the items that are listed under the response plan are lifted straight from what we had adopted in the tobacco and vaping policy, and are broadly similar to what was in the South Portland one. But I was curious to just revisit some of those and how comfortable we were necessarily in that. It's not dictating any required action, so it is kind of summarizing the various kinds of things that might be considered. But, as I was revisiting it, thinking about this issue, I wasn't quite sure what to make, particularly of D, level of involvement in school activities and academics, and how that might influence the response plan. So that was one that gave me pause, as I was like, wait, that was the language we had previously. I'm not sure about that. So that was one thing I was curious, just looking at those items again. And then I'm curious for 2 items on the distribution side of the response procedure.
Oh, sorry, can you repeat that last part, Aaron? What's the distribution?
Well, we'll get to it. I'll pose that question in a second. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't like the D.
Well, so when I read it, when I thought that how that would be taken into consideration was more in you identified those students who are, already disengaged and who a more harsh discipline reaction could be even more detrimental to their engagement. So, but to your point, that's probably there from an old, understanding of if they're already disengaged, then this is clearly a kid that's not, this is probably meant to push them out further. But I do believe that through our current practices, this might help us identify, like, okay, this is a kid that's already, or a student who's not already engaged. This is a kid that there's a greater level of support that's required here. That's not just a possession or use issue, much like we were just indicating, So that D did not stand out to me in that regard. But perhaps I was just looking at it through rosy-colored lenses.
I bought rose-colored glasses for our cabinet meeting.
Outstanding. That's what we all need.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I can see that, so that certainly gets to like implementation, and just like what the actual kind of, how we monitor.
Yeah, I didn't read it that way, but I wonder if adding the way you did, Roberta, but I wonder if adding something like level of involvement in school activities and academics, I don't know if it would be too, because it sounds like you're saying that would be to inform how that student is already connected and to, know that level of support may be helpful for them. Is that what you were seeing it as? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, yeah, I read it as a positive. Like, we're also going to consider this when we look at what the what the consensus is. Like, when we reach consensus, that's one of the things we're going to consider. This is when I look at level of involvement in school activities and academics, I summarize that in how engaged this child is with their school community. So if you identify a child that's not already engaged, and here, I just know this kid because I get getting disciplinary referrals, and that's the only basis for your connection to them, as opposed to, they have some other, engaging piece with the school, then clearly that plays into how you're going to address it.
I wonder if there's like some language to add in the introductory paragraph that communicates a little more explicitly that it's in service of supporting, not necessarily re-engagement, but like, positive engagement with the school community, that like the intent of the response plan is to provide them the right kind of supports to be productively, meaningfully engaged in the school community, right? Because I don't think
that part isn't sounding punitive, Aaron. Like maybe to me that would help the next part not sound, because that level of involvement to me did sound like, so if you have that,
right,
then that makes us look at you differently, as opposed to it just being just considering our response differently, right? It felt to me it jumped out to me more as like we're going to look at kids in a more positive light here and not a positive light here, but that doesn't have to be the case, I think. So yeah, I think that would help. A little bit more language about, how did you put it?
I think something about positive engagement, because like I don't necessarily want to frame it as like re-engagement, right, with the school community, because that's making an assumption that they're not engaged, but just, so it's to, in service of supporting like positive engagement with the school community, something like that. Okay. Well, if we can, let's maybe talk a little bit about on the, because this is where, because I had just based on our prior, discussions, throughout, right, the South Portland policy had a reference to referral to law enforcement, even for possession and use. So just to be clear, had pulled that out based on all of our, kind of preceding conversations related to that. However, certainly it gets a little stickier when we're at the context of, students, essentially engaged in, trafficking, I guess, right? So in that procedure, I added the language of number 2, right, to essentially to make a referral to KLGB as opposed to dictating in this policy what we're going to do, but essentially saying in accordance with KLGB, right? Which, I think this would fall, if we're remembering KLGB, it's like that second section. It's like a significant crime, right? But it's in consultation with the superintendent's office. It's not the like, pick up the phone, call the police right away, right? But it's in consultation with the superintendent's office. So, and then will be confiscated and may be turned over to the police. So that was some intentional verb selection there. So that's one piece of feedback. Then number 5, again, this is a question for this committee of like, if a student is, dealing drugs, right, selling pills or whatever the case may be, right, this affirmatively says will include suspension, doesn't tie it, the prior policy, even for like possession or use, was like first offense 5 days, second offense 10 days. The prior policy said 10 days automatic for any kind of distribution. So I have kept the like, it would be a suspension, from the premise of, it's engendering health and safety, it feels like a significant violation, but not tying numbers of days, and again, reference JKD. And then I kept the rest of that language, which, I'm going to ask Drummond, I think may need to be in there legally, like that we need to at least keep open the option of potential referral for expulsion, because this was language that was in the weapons, violence, and school safety policy that referred to trafficking in that way. So I definitely will ask for kind of the legal review on that piece, but I brought it in just at least to kind of spark this conversation. So on that one, I was curious for a little bit of discussion on the language related to kind of referral to the police, so number 2, and then the language in number 5.
Or did you have any?
No, I'm just thinking about it.
I have a couple of things.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, when we look back at KLGB, the district staff in consultation with the superintendent or superintendent/designee may request assistance from law enforcement when student conduct constitutes a serious crime offense, and then in that list is where selling drugs is included. So that's what governs. Yeah. I guess that to me, the part that stood out, but as the more that I read it, it didn't stand out, is the confiscating paraphernalia, just because the paraphernalia on that same policy on KLG, possession of alcohol, tobacco, or marijuana solely for personal use, which I always put paraphernalia as personal use, not selling. That's under the will not call the police for. So do we confiscate paraphernalia, and then obviously we don't turn it over to police? So that part.
Admins have drawers of vape pens.
I bet, yeah. Right. I can't imagine right now how many of those they're taking and how frequently. They're so prevalent.
Yeah. But yeah, I hear that. I didn't know if that should be left in, if there was particularly paraphernalia associated with distribution, like scales or whatever, right? Any kind of evidence. I mean, I was thinking of it more broadly in this case of like evidence that we might be confiscating versus paraphernalia. So, just somebody who had a vape pen.
Yeah. So then so when you added that number 2 there, the alternative would be, like you said, to write straight out the language in consultation with the superintendent or the designee. Law enforcement may be.
Yeah, that could be one alternative. I mean, the prior policy in the South Portland policy were like, shall call law enforcement immediately or whatever, right? So yeah, I think it was, I was taking a little bit of the cue. We did the same in the policy, like the policy in 2 places. One, it refers, the draft policy. Under B interventions, it says law enforcement may also be notified in certain circumstances in accordance with board policy KLGB. So I was kind of taking a cue from that of kind of consistent language.
Quick question that's about the paraphernalia question, which when you were referencing that, Chair, was that KLGB or what was that from? Sorry with my knowing which policy. Oh, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I was taking a bite of food.
I know.
What was your question again?
The piece that you were talking about that the paraphernalia was referenced. Which policies?
In KLGB, in the law enforcement.
And I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. Does that list all what paraphernalia entails?
No, it just says possession of alcohol, tobacco, or marijuana solely for personal use. So it doesn't necessarily say paraphernalia.
Oh, okay. Because I was thinking, are needles considered paraphernalia? That just came out. We don't actually have them listed because that feels different to me than, I don't know. I was just thinking of what is that actually? That definition. What does that include? So.
Well, I think it's fine. Like referencing KLG like this and number 2 makes sense. And the may be turned over to police. Is that one of the verbs that you said that?
Yeah.
I mean, I put that in there. Like the language I had copied it from was all substances and paraphernalia will be confiscated and turned over to the police. But so I added, it will be confiscated, right? Mm-hmm. We're taking it. And it may be turned over to police pending the consultation with the superintendent was my intent with that language.
Yeah. Do you think it could be confusing? Because KLG would still question whether law enforcement will be there. And here, there's almost like an assumption that law enforcement will be there. The only may is whether or not we will hand over the evidence.
Well, I mean that sentence, and what did we say at the beginning? All prohibited. So in just the substance use and possession, all prohibited products in paraphernalia will be confiscated and disposed of by school personnel. So it just says prohibited products, which could be inclusive of paraphernalia. So, I mean, we maybe could just align the language, all prohibited products will be confiscated by school personnel. Maybe if we added that and maybe turned over to the police, that would help clarify who's doing what.
And then would it not say the police department may be notified, or is that would stay?
That would stay. I think we're talking about the second sentence there, just clarifying what exactly happens there a little bit. So if it said all prohibited substances or whatever the language is from the first part, all prohibited products, say substances, will be confiscated by school personnel and may be turned over to the police. I kind of like that a little bit better. It breaks up the confiscation of it and turning it over.
And then the JKD, I don't have it in front of me because that hasn't been updated yet. The JKD
suspension policy,
the suspension one. The one that's on board docs is still the 2013 revised one.
I think she might. Oh, hang on.
All the other ones were there, by the way. So maybe it's.
I think she maybe didn't do the date because I was like, I need this suspension one updated. So it may be. So she didn't. She hasn't updated the date, the language of it, though.
Okay. Yeah. I'm reading through it.
Because it had our kind of introduction and stuff, Yeah. So it's up. Yeah. So.
I don't know that I would have. So possession will include a suspension in accordance to JKD.
Not possession, dispensing, distributing, or selling prohibited products.
How often does that happen?
Not very. Mm-mm. I'm not familiar with an instance. The only instance I guess I'm aware of, this is actually tobacco vaping. And the tobacco vaping policy has stronger language that we may need to revisit. It says selling distribution shall be referred to law enforcement. So we may need to come back to tidy that up, but that's not for today. What did it say? No, God, that's still the old one there. Sorry, Roberto, what was your question? I've confused myself.
There's a suspension. That it does trigger a suspension. I don't know.
I mean, again, for possession, we definitely have removed any required suspension. The prior policy had it. First offense was 5 days.
The dispensing, distributing, and selling.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, I just want to understand how does it fit with our, knowing that suspensions are not an effective way to alter behavior. I just want to know how do we reconcile that? But at the same time, I understand that it is a health risk, right? Or that's how we're describing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why I wanted to talk about it. It just feels like that's in some it's not a very frequent occurrence, right? And I guess from a school administrator perspective, I would hold like a lot of kids probably, some subgroup of kids are aware, right? That this is happening in the school, so there's like a couple sides, at least, to the coin of like kind of taking some of this action. Some is obviously, the most important is like, what's it doing for the individual, right? But it does also have a broader thing about what's okay or not okay in our community, right? That kind of sends a message. And so anyway, I just wanted to leave it in for, kind of this aspect of the discussion of like, we think, and again, it was backing it off from like a mandatory 10-day suspension to just, and that was, I wanted to make the reference to JKD. My thinking of the reference to the policy was, again, to bring back to the language where we're like stopgap measure to get a safety plan in place. Those were the things that were running through my mind, which is like, okay, this is significant, right? This is a significant event if somebody is caught, selling. and we need to get a plan in place. Doesn't mean they have to be out for 10 days, like, just boom, right? But so it could be one day, it could be in school suspension, right? It could look like a bunch of different things, but a little bit of demarcation that, like, so, but I'm calling it out because it was, for discussion.
Laura, any thoughts on that?
So this is the right copy that we're looking at now. Did you say this was not the update
of the suspension policy? We were talking about the suspension policy. The suspension policy is up to date on board docs.
Okay. I just want to make sure I was looking at the right.
Yep.
The right document. Okay. Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying about, what's the message about healthy norms, and then also what Roberto's saying about, is it really, is the suspension, is that going to affect the behavior? I see both sides of that, but I do think having I like that it doesn't say the specific, number of days of suspend. It gives more latitude about how to use that, but yeah. Maybe I don't. Okay, so you said before. Remind me what the suspension number of days that was in the language.
Yep. Let me just scroll down to it. So furnishing, distributing, selling, first offense, suspend student for 10 days.
Yeah. Okay.
Second offense is recommend for expulsion.
Yeah.
That's the current policy on the books.
Mm-hmm. And would you say that has been followed? But you're saying it doesn't happen all that often anyway, but.
I'm only, sorry, that's where I lost my train of thought earlier.
Yeah.
I had an administrator who, had a kid's backpack full of vape cartridges, not marijuana, but, just nicotine smoking ones, pre-pandemic. So we obviously didn't move to expel them in any way.
Yeah.
And they didn't get 10 days either, at that point.
Okay.
So again, that didn't necessarily fall under this policy. This is, at that time, the tobacco and vaping is a separate one. But so I'm not aware of a bunch of drugs being sold in the building,
And I guess my sense is that if it doesn't happen very often, and there might be unique things to consider, to have a policy that automatically calls to suspension might not be the way we want to go. But yet, I do understand that suspension could potentially be one of the options. But to include it, I don't know, it just doesn't feel appropriate. I appreciate, though, that we went to an automatic 10-day and to now just have it. It's even, it just doesn't seem to be aligned with what we've been saying.
So the recommendation there, if I'm hearing you right, would, potentially, we don't need to wordsmith it exactly, but
not trigger an automatic suspension.
Yeah, it said may, and we could shift the will to may, right?
So even that, I think even that would be sufficient. Because I feel like there's a difference between like you said, like a backpack filled of like cartridges, be them, THC or nicotine. There's only one reason why you would have, like a backpack filled with them. Not one reason, but I'm saying that it seems easier to conclude that you might be intending to sell, versus like a kid who just one time wanted to experiment with trying to sell a couple of like extra bags of like weed that he had, which is not necessarily like, it's probably just like a one-time thing. And I'd hate to kick this kid, to suspend this kid for something that he just did. I had a bad, stupid moment,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if those are two good examples, contrasting examples, but I don't know.
Yeah. So
I guess I also was wondering on the substance use counseling, how does that look for like someone who we're referring because of distribution? Like what does that counseling look like? And
yeah, I mean that's where it was, or other support programs. It wasn't, because I mean it very well could be that they're not actually using at all, right? It's just. They need income, right? And so, this is how they're getting there. So it may not actually be a substance use issue. So, so that was where, still kept the language above 3 about a referral. So we can, have an evaluation of whether what's appropriate or not. And that would inform, may also, it says may also choose from the following list of options. So it doesn't necessarily require that somebody goes through substance use if that's, not appropriate.
yeah, so I think that'd be changing the will to may for the suspension might be the only thing that I'm coming out with.
Mm-hmm.
Way back. What do you think? Like when you ask like administrators or other folks, what would their take be on that? To your guess.
My hunch would be that they would assume there would be at least some level of automatic, like they would expect that it would be a suspension of some kind. Not necessarily the 10 days, but I think they'd be surprised a little bit if, and again, people weren't hung up on this part of it, which I think is reflective of like, they don't really have to deal with this. Their primary issue is the first, just use and possession, right? And how we're responding and supporting kids in that. So that was where all of their energy lay, not in terms of this. So I do think that's an indicator of how frequently they have to deal with it. But I do think, we're battling, or not battling, but just reculturing a little bit around our stance here, and I think I can imagine that might be a place for folks where it might feel a little dissonance of like, whoa, we don't even necessarily suspend for a kid who's dealing. Could be a moment to, wow, okay, when it's, anyway. So
it's the same. I mean, it's also the same of like, suspending a kid who's dealing doesn't really address the fact that there's a kid dealing.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. When you say that, Aaron, it just makes me think, well, that might be a good conversation too, right? Because like you said, Roberto, is it because doing the suspension is effective at changing behavior, or is it because that's the culture of how it's been dealt with, and so it's uncomfortable to change it, which that's, a valid response too, but I just would be curious if it's because,
I mean, I do think it comes more from the norm. I think I forget exactly the language you used, but that was what I was trying to say, or of like, what is the norm of what's like acceptable in our community or not? And like, how do we communicate those, that stance? And, issuing discipline is not necessarily, that's only one way, right? And excluding kids for a shortened duration of time is one way that signals it. It's not the only way though, right? No. That's all part of PBIS is laying out clear expectations on the front end, right? And all those kinds of things. So it's not the only tool in the toolkit for that, but, it is one that has currency, right?
I was thinking too that I don't know that I really understand what an in-school suspension looks like. So I was just thinking, like, with that being an option, doesn't exclude kids from, getting some of their educate. But I don't I don't know what a.
Well, it's an in-school suspension would be where they're not like, if their class schedule has them going to whatever, and they're not doing that, that's an in-school suspension.
They're
If they're
like
out of their regular program. Yeah. Generally they're out of one, and not all of our schools, the middle schools typically have a structure for it, but the high schools, not as much. And so it is a little more supervised. It's not like, for some kids, the out of school suspensions, like, day out of school, right? So some ways, for some may experience in-school suspension as a bit of a harsher punishment.
Yeah.
Right? But it just means that they're not in their regular academic program. We're keeping them out of their regular academic program where they would be getting direct, grade level instruction.
I was thinking then they weren't missing some academic, but it sounds like they really wouldn't be getting academic. Time.
They're given work and things like that. It's not like they're just sitting there, Breakfast Club style or whatever.
Yeah.
Attention, but it's not the same. The academic experience. Okay. I think, just to that point, it doesn't, that whole section still has the expectation of the development of a response plan and that kind of thing. So, it isn't solely related to kind of the disciplinary action related to it. So that's obviously what we've been focused on. But so that approach is consistent even in this instance, right, where there's an expectation to do this referral. What does this kid need? Have a meeting to figure out what we're doing to support them, right? It's just this question of a little more explicitness about what level of disciplinary consequence would be appropriate.
And can you remind me also for our co-curricular participation policy, this is a bridge of that, right? So does this prevent? So that's another question mark for me, because that also our co-curricular policy starts with participation in co-curriculars. It's a privilege. So I still would want us to talk or maybe ask, how do we feel about eliminating that opportunity from kids who are, particularly in the first part of this policy, the ones who are in the use, in the possession because of use part of it. Any thoughts on that?
I know that this whole matrix, which is what LinkedIn, the co-curricular policy, has a bunch of elements to it, and about academic eligibility and so forth, but it calls out explicitly, right, which is what refers to this matrix, both substance use in this way, as well as the tobacco and vaping. So it's those issues, related to, that kind of drive towards this matrix. So, as you can see, it is, there's a lot of kind of negative repercussion there. I think all of this got adopted just before I started, so I wasn't necessarily in all of those conversations. But it's pretty recent in terms of it having been developed.
Yeah, I remember, I think it says 2013 in the document, but I want to say that we've seen this since I've been here.
Yeah.
Adopted to that. Maybe it's been revised.
Right.
Because I do remember looking at this and it was really complicated to understand at first.
Right. Athletics and co-curricular. So yeah, the policy itself was last revised on June 2018.
Yep, I was there for that.
It doesn't indicate that the matrix was updated then, but I have to believe that's when that happened as well.
Yeah, I remember looking at this.
Because that was, there's a reference to the matrix in this section.
So I'm just reading through it. Where does it say specifically the language around possession or use?
Sorry, say that one more time, Roberto.
just when I'm looking at this matrix, I just want to know how do I tie in the drug use?
Yep, it's really from the policy. So, and I can put the link to the policy in to make that easy. But, so the policy, like section 5, kind of in the beginning part of the policy, refers to student use of tobacco, alcohol, and drugs is illegal and negatively affects student health, safety, and performance. Students participating in athletic and co-curricular activities carry a responsibility to themselves, their fellow coaches, etc., etc. Therefore, they'll not engage in these prohibited behaviors described in policy JICH-R and policy ADC, so the two, related ones. At any time or place from the beginning of the student's first athletic or co-curricular activity of the year through the end of the school year. So that means if you play a fall sport, it's all year. If you only don't play a fall sport, this applies from the start of winter season on, or whatever it may be.
Yeah. That seems a little bit off.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it extended in this case beyond. I mean, I don't know what the discussion was at the time. I was aware as a high school student that there were end of the season parties. So I wonder if it was in relationship to that it was extended through the end of the year.
It's a risk mitigation strategy. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, but I mean, yeah. So, I mean, we're kind of on the co-curricular policy. So so that may warrant, some review. It'd be good for me to check in with the athletic directors and everybody about just how that's being implemented in this context right now. So
yeah, and that'd be good to know. I don't think that this prevents, like, knowing what co-curricular does it seems to be like that happens separate of whatever we put here, JICH.
Right.
Yes. The what JICH is asking for here in the procedures, would still happen regardless of what the impact is on a student's co-curricular. But I do think we should look into that.
Let me just write it down.
Particularly, we saw earlier the level of engagement that's going to be assessed as we figure out the level of involvement in the school's activities and academics. Because in the second violation, that's going to look differently, right? If we kick them out of our co-curriculars.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, I just gendered that comment. My bad. Matrix.
Okay, so I'm capturing that in the notes of just the need to kind of come back to that potentially. So for the co-curricular one. Okay, as it relates to this, so my next step. So I hear the the suggestion of changing in section 5, changing that that will to a may in the first sentence. To allow for there may be instances where suspension is not appropriate. Certainly includes suspension and up to potentially recommendation for expulsion. So I want to do have Drummond do a legal review of the procedure would be my next step here. I don't expect huge substantive feedback out of it. I mean, given, kind of the other one and given what we had for tobacco and vaping, in terms of we had similar language, but that'll be kind of my next step. So.
Great. Yeah, I didn't have anything else. Or did you have any other thoughts on this one?
No, sorry, I had run to get my charger, so I missed a little bit of that, but
We were just
I caught up.
we're talking about the co-curricular policy mainly, and the need to revisit that potentially, or just have a broader discussion about the relationship between these two. And is that, given where we've been trending in this work, right, is that the kind of stance we want to continue to hold?
Yeah,
And so were you talking? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just one of the links that Aaron put on the chat, if you have a chance to look at it, it's a matrix that's used for co-curriculars to figure out like how, how discipline is handled. Really interesting.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Were you talking about the part where there's very specific consequences to co-curricular, like
Right.
time that you would
and whether, there's lots of conditionality, about whether a student signs a contract, and that reduces maybe the number of games that they may miss, right? And it governs whether they can continue to practice or not, and whether they can maintain a captain's position and things like that. So,
okay.
And self-reporting.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the co-curricular code of conduct is helpful. So, thank you. I don't have any other questions.
That'll be for the next policy committee.
Yeah.
So then, is this so you need to take? Do you want us to? At what point is this right now for this committee?
Right. I think this comes back to, we've had the legal review of the policy. The policy is ultimately the primary thing that the board approves. So we certainly could take action on moving the policy forward. I can continue to tune up the procedure, right, to kind of bring forward. I think, we would bring it forward for full visibility and so forth, right? But nominally, we don't ask for approval of the procedures, right? So I'd say we could move the policy forward and then bring along the procedure, and there'll, we'll have a workshop whenever it gets agendized and that kind of thing. So, Aura will have a chance to discuss it, but.
Good. Yeah. So just to kind of recap, is there anything in the policy that you think, because of what we talked about in the procedures, that we should? No, right? I don't think any of that stuff. Yeah. So if that's the case, I think why don't we do that? Why don't we vote on the policy and then just have the procedural work left over, so we can at least take this off of the docket.
Yeah.
Right. So then I'll move to approve the proposed policy JICH to the full board for their consideration.
Okay. Second.
All right. And as I just said, so without objection, we'll note it as unanimous from the committee to recommend the policy to the full board. And when do you think you'll have something for the procedure for the board to discuss, since they don't approve it? You think?
Oh yeah, I'm going to send it to Anne. I'll have it for prior to a first read. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, all right. Perfect.
Yeah, I want to have it tight and clean before it gets for a first read.
Great. And I think that we don't have this on the agenda for today, but did we create a summary of our end of year work? Did we end up?
I had that attached to the last meeting, the October meeting minutes. I had a one pager that had that summary.
All right, good stuff. All right, perfect. So then we don't have. That's it. That's the end of our policy committee. So Aaron can go on vacation now. he can take off. Good stuff. All right. Well, we're early. We're finishing up pretty early tonight, which is good news given the short week. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. It's been fun sharing the committee this year. Getting so much done. Really appreciate Aaron just spearheading such a large bulk of work amidst an incredibly taxing school year. So I'm proud to have been a small part of it. I hope our lengthy and sometimes we segued a lot into our discussions at times. And I know that sometimes is it's not the best way to use our times, but I think it's always a good exercise as the team to explore, the different aspects of the work and how many layers of difficulty, and challenging dynamics school policy takes. So I've enjoyed how much I've learned over the last year, and through your support, Aaron, I really appreciate everything that you've brought to the table. And yeah, we're a better district because of the work we've approved here, I think.
Thank you. Appreciate your leadership. And Aura, it's been great to have you. We'll see how things get reconfigured as we move forward here, but look forward to continuing it.
And thank you to Roberto's leadership for 5 years, and all the work that you've spearheaded is going to continue on. And like I said in our last meeting, the WWRD, what would Roberto do? I'm going to keep in my heart and mind continuing on. So I hope you know that, we're going to keep at this work. So I appreciate your mentorship and leadership so much. And we'll miss working with you, but look forward to continuing with some new voices too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can't wait to see what the next year of work brings along. So I'm excited. All right. So with that, we'll take a motion to adjourn our meeting. I'm sorry, Aaron, were you going to say something?
No. Just wish everybody a happy holiday, and
That's right. Yes. Enjoy the rest of the week and some time off.
Yeah.
So we'll take a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor will indicate, and we've adjourned at 7:09 p.m. Have a great night.